Wine lovers, pour yourselves a glass because this one's especially for you. After testing pottery from the plains of the Caucasus, an international team of researchers have found some of the oldest evidence for winemaking. What's the vintage? These pots may be at least 8,000 years old, almost 1,000 years earlier than what we knew before today. And joining me to talk about the new discovery are two archaeologists from the University of Toronto, Stephen Batiuk and Andrew Graham. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about the pottery you were studying.
Well, the pottery itself is fairly nondescript. It doesn't, when you look at it, it's handmade, it's fired at a fairly low temperature, I would say, full of grit, so it really does not look like anything special, definitely not like anything you would buy in a store today. For the most part, it will be undecorated, although in the cases, or a number of cases of these storage jars that we tested, they will have what we call plastic decoration. So they'll take bits of clay that they will stick onto the vessel while it's still wet before they fired it to add different shapes. And they will often have depictions of what look like clusters of grapes, or even in a number of cases of people sort of dancing with their hands in the air with what seems to be grapes hanging from a trellis or from vines above them. The vessels that we had tested, they were storage jars, probably somewhere between 200 and 300 liters in volume. While they were shattered, when you're working on archaeological excavation, all you are really left with are shards or small pieces. And so we targeted the bases where any residue would have actually collected. So they were just very simple, flat but narrow bases that probably would have allowed the vessel to sit in the ground to increase its stability.
And how do you test for wine in the bottom of these pottery?
Well, that actually is perhaps a question better for Pat McGovern, who is at the University of Pennsylvania, who is the specialist in this. He's actually one of the people who helped develop the technique in the first place, but it is looking, it's going into the realm of organic chemistry, and you're looking for specific acids that are the sign of wine. In particular, tartaric acid is the main one, but also malic acid. And it's looking for those signatures that you have a hint that originally it would have been some sort of grape product that was in the vessel.
And why might the environmental conditions in this region have been good for being one of the earliest wine regions in the world?
Well, part of the larger study that our international collaborators worked on, they had done some modeling, climatic modeling based on proxy data. And they're able to sort of reconstruct what the environment would have looked like in different time periods, basically from the Neolithic through to the medieval period. And based on what we understand of the best climate to grow grapes in now, they could sort of model back and figure out how much grapes would be growing in different time periods. And the Neolithic is perhaps one of the highest. Actually, the highest is following the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, but the Neolithic is one of the highest periods of grape growing potential.
And it's not just grapes on vases, it's not just chemicals in the bottom of jars. You have evidence of grapes in the region, but it's not seeds. Can you tell me a little more about that?
One of the other studies that was done by our Georgian specialist, Iviso Kvavadze, was looking at pollen. And so we would collect, as we were excavating the vessels, we would collect soil, and she would then look at that and basically try to extract the pollen from it and look at it to see what it was found. Pollen and also other sort of microscopic elements. So we have actually evidence of a lot of grape pollen in the soil, if you will, or in the residue that was found in the vessels. Plus also other things like fragments of little fruit flies, like the ones that, well, we actually had flying around here before. But if you've ever made wine, as soon as you start pressing grapes and pouring it into vats, you're just surrounded by these small fruit flies, and you're actually finding those in there as well.
And the pottery belongs to a culture called the Shuleveri-Shomu culture. I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit about who they were.
Well, it's a Neolithic farming culture. It was found, well, I guess in what we would today call parts of southeastern Georgia, western Azerbaijan, and northern Armenia. There were no political borders back then, obviously. It's a simple farming society. They live in these small round mud brick houses. They vary in size from about 1.5 to 4 meters in diameter, although actually our excavations produced some of the largest structures for this culture, about 6 meters in diameter.
6 to 7 meters.
Yeah. Simple farming tools, mostly made out of obsidian, so a volcanic glass, which occurs naturally in the region. Evidence from the paleobotany that they were growing triticum wheat, and also animal bones, sheep, goat, and cattle.
So you crushed the record, to use a stupid pun, to get this across by about 1,000 years. And 1,000 years later, fast forward, we're in Iran. How does the wine in your vessels compare to the wine you found in that, or that was found in that vessel?
Well, one of the big differences between the stuff that we found and what Pat had found earlier with the material from Iran is that the Iranian stuff had evidence of also terebinth resin. Now, the terebinth resin is often added to wines as a stabilizing agent, sort of like what we would use sulfates for. Nowadays, you would use terebinth resin, and that's seen even today with Greek Hatsina.
Yeah.
That's where the name comes from, is from the terebinth resin that's put into it. And so, at least 1,000 years later, they've discovered this idea of stabilizing agent. So this is a good suggestion, at least, that we're dealing with probably a period of experimentation. This is the learning curve, if you will, of wine production. That they're making the wine, they've figured out how to crush it, they recognize the importance and how to actually let it ferment, but it takes them a little bit of a while to figure out how to stabilize and keep it longer.
So there's a large theme in the research that you're publishing is about new questions. I'm just wondering if you can give me a better sense of some of the new questions you're able to start asking now that you have this framework available.
Well, one of the big questions we need to move forward with is, well, first of all, how much further back we can push it. Our excavations have dated, the earliest levels that we are right now are basically at the threshold of what we understand of the Shulavere Shomu culture. So I think the date was 5980.
5980, yeah.
And we know that based on some of the earlier excavations that were done at the site, that we still have another meter 80 to go in excavation. So we should be able to push it back a little further, maybe a couple hundred years. Can't say for sure. But then we also want to move the other direction as well, because we now know that they are definitely making it in the Neolithic. We know that they are making it for sure in the Middle Bronze Age, and there's mounting evidence that they're making it in the Early Bronze Age. So what is happening between 6000 BC and 3000 BC? And so, well, I guess actually I should say 5000 BC and 3000 BC, because
we know what's happening between
the Shulavere Shomu culture runs for 1,000 years. So we hope to actually bridge the gap, if you will, chronologically, to show that you actually have a continuous 8,000 years of wine production in the region, which is one of sort of the slogans, if you will, of the Georgians right now.
Now, beautiful glasses of wine in front of us, but this isn't just a prop per se. I'm just wondering if you can give me a sense of how this wine helps us understand the wine that you guys studied from 8,000 years ago.
I'll let you take this one.
Well, so we've been talking about, we've been talking about the pottery, we've been talking about the archaeology, and what we haven't talked about is the actual unique process with which the Georgians produced their wine today, and as far as we can tell, it's how they were producing their wine in antiquity as well, all the way back to the Neolithic. That's our hypothesis. The wine that we're drinking here is made in a vessel called a kvevri. Kvevri is the name, and Georgian language is difficult to pronounce, and it's also a very difficult language because it's a linguistic isolate. It's not related to any other language, so apologies for any mispronunciation. But the kvevri are large ceramic vessels that range in size from, say, 10 liters to,
I've seen one you could drive a car into.
Yeah, 5,000, 10,000 liters. And certainly in the medieval period, they were making kvevri this size. So unlike the tradition that most people will be familiar with in terms of taking the grapes and then crushing them and then separating the juice from the seeds and the skin, so you have just the juice and pressing them. The Georgian tradition is they take all of the skins, the grapes, the stems, it all goes into a large wooden log, and that gets compressed down, and then the juice and the stems and the seeds, everything gets scooped up and goes into the kvevri, and there it sits in the ground, either outside, and they have a specific building to house these kvevri called a marani. And just about every Georgian house will have a marani of sorts. Usually it's in the basement, but it doesn't have to be. It could be an exterior building. And this wine will sit in the ground uncovered for, depending on the variety, depending on what the winemaker's looking for, the wine will just sit there. The sediment just settles all out. And then they will, when it's time, they will cap it. Once all the CO2 is off, they'll cap it with a stone sealed with clay, and then it just gets covered with sand, and then it sits there and preserved.
It can sit there, well, depending on, as Andrew said, how they want to do it, anywhere from 3 weeks to 8 months,
8 months.
it will sit with the skin contact.
And then they will siphon that off to a smaller Fevri, and then they will then dig out all of the sediment and everything that remains and clean the old Fevri and get it ready for next year's production. That's how they make Georgian wine, in the past and today. But it's a craft level of production because of the process. It's very labor intensive, and they can only make relatively small batches. And so that wine is just very, very different. Now, unique. You can tell by looking at the color of it. This is a white grape. Kisi is a white variety. And you can tell that this is just not your typical Chardonnay. This has a lot, because of the skin contact and because of the production process of this craft, you get a very unique color, a unique nose, aroma, and as you've tasted on the palate, a very unique taste profile that's unexpected. And most people who've never had it, like your own reaction, well, that's different.